Welcome to the April recent release roundup. We're going to talk about, I think, 9 books. If you're new to these videos, it's where I go on the internet and I aggregate a bunch of opinions on some buzzy releases. Sometimes books that I'm interested in, sometimes books that are so buzzy I can't ignore them. There'll be a playlist of previous versions of this video. There'll be a Goodreads shelf, and there'll be a link to every video of all of the content creators that I watched their stuff. I think I watched like 50 videos for this one. Even though it's only 9 books, there were a lot of opinions about a lot of these. There were some buzzy books in April. And so, yeah, you have that entire description to use as you see fit. I'm hoping this is a helpful video for you. And we're just going to get into it in no particular order. They're just in the order in which I wrote my notes. And honestly, we're getting the most hyped one out of the way. This one was not even on my radar. It wasn't on a lot of people's radar. And now everyone, myself including, is looking to read it because hype. What is this book? And that is Fourth Wing. This book has a ridiculous rating, like truly. But I'm excited. This isn't someone you can look up, but one of my close friends who got me into reading like Sarah J. Maas loved this book. And since we have like one-to-one taste, I'm like, yes, I have a flight happening soon. I have this book ready for that flight. I know exactly when I'm going to read this because essentially this is a brain candy book. This is a book where if you like these tropes, if this is what you like about addictive, page-turning fantasy romance, and it has, like, I believe, pretty strong fantasy and pretty strong, like, romance spice components, although I don't think it's equal parts. I would probably think, based off the reviews, it's, like, 40% fantasy plot, but, like, 60% you care about these character interactions and relationships and the will they, won't they, of they all. That's what I got from reviews. And speaking of reviews, there are so many. This is not an all-inclusive list. This is a list of things that I put together. And so we've got Bethany Marinez, and actually what's interesting about that is Bethany has a glowing review and even a video discussing what's it like to, love something but also have friends who hate it, and kind of references Marinez's review, who gives it 1 star. So if you want a critical critique of this book, Marinez is always really good at showing us why some of these campy brain candy books are honestly really trash, which, fair, I love that she does that, but that's there for you. We have Elliot, who, I watched, she has 2 reviews. She has one in her, new fantasy release videos, and then she has her, hour-long video on Fourth Wing, which I haven't watched yet, because I want to watch that after I read it. But I think she's more in the middle and just confused about where this came from and why this is resonating, because I think that's a lot of us. We're just trying to figure out what's going on. We have Jess Owens, who had a positive good time, and because of Jess, Ray and Robin read it, and I don't think I saw a review from Robin yet on my feed as of filming this, but Ray just put up their review, and I just watched it, and Ray hates fantasy romance. The minute they picked it up for a buddy read, even in this video, they were like, oh no, this is not my thing, why are we reading this? But also loved it. So this seems to be a book that's scratching a particular itch for a lot of people. We also have Coffee with Katie, Bill Reads, and Eliza's Bookshelf. So those are the reviews I watched, because also since I wanted to read this, I didn't want to be like... It was a book I was willing to watch more reviews for than I normally would for books that I want to read, because I'm not in this book for the twists and turns. I actually want it to, be a thing that is relatively predictable, because that's what I kind of want my brain candy to be. It's kind of like my version of, picking up a romance is, I actually kind of want it to have these structural components in it. That's what I'm looking for. So if you didn't know, new adult fantasy romance from a new line, and it has a dragon riding academy. It's apparently very harsh. There are only so many dragons and there's so many people pursuing it, and our main character wasn't even going to be a dragon rider, but her mom's making her because she was a dragon rider, because this is a healthy way to raise your children. And also there is chronic disability rep in our main character that I've heard is done pretty well. So yeah, it's pure entertainment. I think there's a slight love triangle into an enemies to lovers situation, and everyone is desperately clamoring for the sequel that should be out this fall, I believe. And I'm just down. I'm really down to read it. I will say, if you want a good 3.5-star review, Bill Reads, I think, did a pretty good job with it, and also did a good job at making me even more excited. I heard this in a couple of reviews of slight divergentness. So a divergentness with a Sarah J. Maasness and a big fantasy academy college equivalent and romance. I just want it to be fun. I have a very long flight. I just want to be engaged in reading. That's all. So I'm really hoping that for as engaging this was for a majority of people, it will be for me, which is I think why it has such a high rating, because I know some people have a vast spreadsheet of how they rate books. I think the average person reads books based off how fun was this to read. And if a book hooks you and you don't put it down, it's a 5-star even if well, that wasn't the perfect characterization or the world building or anything like that. This next one is another very popular book by a very popular author. And I might read this one. I still need to explore this author. And she's not on my list, especially since I think I like contemporary things in this vein. I just haven't explored it yet. And this is Happy Place by Emily Henry. Oh, I have so many reviews for this. We have Abby Salter, who has both a review for this in their wrap-up and also I've read every Emily Henry book. This is what I think of all of them and who I'd recommend them to video. So I'll have both of those down below. We have Allie Do Eyes Read, and we have Steph from Bookish Steph, Mel Reads, Tia Chu, Bookables, Murphy, and Mara from Books Like Whoa. And there's a whole range here. Like, I think Mara's pretty middle of the road. Same with Steph. Murphy hated it. And everyone else was fairly positive, and Tia Chu, who doesn't like other Emily Henrys, really liked this. And I think expectation games is big for this, especially when I was watching Bookables vlog, is Emily Henry gets put into romance, and there are strong romantic elements. Like, it's a romantic plot, but then there's the romance genre, which has certain expectations of how the tropes are supposed to play out, how the arcs of the stories are supposed to go. And it's not that it doesn't follow the rules. Like, I think the only strict rule for romance is a happily ever after, per se. And I think in this case, though, it's more like what used to be women's fiction or chick lit or whatever, where you're actually like, yes, romance is a part of this, because romance is a part of the human experience for these characters, but it's also about change, about healing, about growth, and sometimes the answers to those things are bittersweet. So I'm getting the sense that this has a bittersweet ending, and that's why it worked or didn't work for some people. And also a big part of this book is around the lack of ability to communicate your needs and where you're at with other people. Which I think can be really cathartic and relatable, but also incredibly annoying. So it depends on where you fall in that. Like, if you haven't somehow heard the general premise, we have this, like, really tight-knit group of friends. Like, they've known each other for decades. They always go to this beach house. This is the last year at the beach house, and our main character and the hero had broken up, but they don't want their friends to know because everyone's so tight-knit. So it's like, it's a second chance romance with some fake dating, and it's two timelines where you have a past timeline where they're falling in love, and then you have our present timeline where, you know, they're not in sync, but there's also this fake dating element. And most people I saw liked the past timeline more. So take that as you will. Honestly, I'm more intrigued with this than not, just because it isn't a traditional romance. Like, I'm okay going through those messier places. I'm someone who has that tight-knit group of friends, so I think a lot of that could be really cathartic, and we're constantly working on evolving our communication and figuring out what we need and where people are at as we're growing and changing and how that affects different people. So I think in some ways I could really connect and enjoy that part. I like a lot of the tropes that are mentioned with the romance. It's just a matter of if I care about them, and I'm a little nervous because Steph, I think, for her, the past timeline was great, but the present timeline, she struggled to want the two people to still be together based off where they are, which is why I think there's a certain level of realism to this that most romance novels kind of avoid for the fantasy of, like, of course they'll get together, of course they'll be this happily ever after. So yeah, those are, I think, the two biggest hitters of my list. This next one's a suspense thriller called The Last Word. I normally don't cover these just because I'm not a thriller suspense reader. I feel like I don't mind them, especially when they're sci-fi suspense or something like that, but it's just not what I gravitate towards. One day I want to read a bunch of popular ones and see what I think. But in general, I've got Literary Life, Carol Marie Reads, Bookables, and Mara. And Mara particularly stresses that this is more of a suspense than a thriller. And for the most part, all of these people were like, yeah, it was fairly predictable. You were never, like, unsure of, per se, where things were going. But the suspense was still there. So it was one of those situations where even if you knew what was going to happen, you were still, like, on the edge of your seat. Also, Mara wanted to preface this by saying it was campy and over the top. Which, you know, if you don't want that, you know, be wary. It's also a book within a book. So the premise of this is we have someone who reads a book that their friend recommended and considered it complete trash and went online and saw all these glowing reviews and was like, well, I'm going to write what I think, and gave like a 1-star review or something. And the author reaches out to them and it's like, you got to take that down, please, you're hurting my livelihood. And they're like, no, sorry, this is for readers, I'm sorry. And then things start to happen. It's like a reverse Misery situation. So it's a fast-paced, goofy, gory, suspense thriller situation, and it's easy. One of the things from Carol Marie Reads thought it was really easy to connect to the main character, so I think that's really important for me in reading experiences. Like, if I can self-insert into these types of, like, reading on a beach or in an airplane book, it makes it a better elevated experience. And also, it's very fast-paced to the point where the entire plot of the book, I believe, takes place in one day. So there you go. That's The Last Word, one of the buzzier releases. I think Mara also compared it to The Writing Retreat in terms of camp level, so if you've read that one. Up next is one that I'm very excited about, and I think the cover looks a lot like a lot of young adult covers for this type of genre, and I thought it would be young adult, but it's not. It's adult horror, and that's The Haunting of Alejandra. This looks so cool. And I didn't know it's based off the La Llorona influence, which is Mexican folklore, primarily. I think it's primarily Mexican. I'm sure there maybe are some other Latin American people who have similar stories or are closer to it, depending on where they are in Central America. But my understanding is it's very Mexican. And this is a woman who kills her children and is a ghost always looking for them. Like, that's like part of the folklore. It obviously changes based off region. It's one of those things that's always evolving, changing. It's a ghost story you tell your children. And this story is about an overworked mom, an underappreciated mom whose husband never really helps out, who loves her kids, but they're such a burden, and she just tries to find moments for herself. And then suddenly there's this like presence haunting her. It's the La Llorona. And it's about, I think, her finding that agency. And also you get to look at perspectives of different generations. And there is this mysterious quality of why is this happening? And it's pretty short. So I'm very interested in it. I really want to highlight Book Whimsy and Michelle's reviews down below. They're both own voices and how I got really excited into the lore of this. Also, Book Whimsy just always does amazing reviews. And Sin's Book Nook also had a great time with this one. I love this cover. It made me think of a lot of young adult contemporary for some reason, and I don't know why at the time. I obviously wasn't looking at it very closely, but this interests me. I'm very excited about it. This next one I think is fairly niche, but I was curious about it, so I looked into some reviews, and this is the fourth Night Angel book, so Night Angel Nemesis by Brent Weeks. I read a lot of Brent Weeks before I was on BookTube. Like, I've read all of his novels, I'm pretty sure. If there are any novellas or whatever, I haven't read those, but I read the entire Night Angel, and I read the entire Lightbringer. I did not like Night Angel. I read Night Angel the same time as Throne of Glass, and I mean, I don't love Throne of Glass either. I like Throne of Glass a little bit more because it had elements that I liked, but they're both pretty, like, generic assassin fantasy that is not for me. And Night Angel also just had writing problems for me. The male gaze of Brent Weeks has never bothered me. It might bother me a bit more today in Night Angel. I don't know. But I did find some reviews, and I still don't think I'm going to go back and reread Night Angel to get to this book. But it does seem like this book is an improvement on that original trilogy if you really just only had a couple issues with that original trilogy. So we have Daniel Green, we have Fantology, Fantasy Files, Connor Reeds, and Rachel from The Shades of Orange. And Rachel did like the first trilogy and gave this 4 stars, which if you don't know, 4-star from Rachel is kind of hard to get. Like 3.5 stars I feel like are like average I liked this rating, but 4 stars, it's pretty hard. So this is a first person kind of framed narrative. We have our main characters from the original trilogy, and it's apparently this kind of contained story, but it's like 800 pages. Like, it's not epic in scope, but it's a very long book. And I do know, I think it was Fantasy Files who really didn't like how long this was, that it was really overwritten for the story being told, and some people were having issues with our main character from the first book. He's still fairly young in this. I mean, he might be in his 20s or early 30s, but he has so many hats. He can be so navel-gazy, and I think he is the author insert for, like, philosophizing and theming, which I don't really love that trend. I don't like when authors do that. So that's kind of a turnoff, but everyone loves the female character, who was not written super well in the first trilogy, and she's apparently a blast in this one. So that has me kind of excited, and they all say it's less cringy. It's not the same male gaze that the original trilogy was. So what I will say is this is a smaller story based off what I've heard than the Night Angel trilogy. You get to explore the world more. I think it really does expand on this world, and this world, that is the thing I remember most of Night Angel, is just the grittiness, the why these roles exist. Like, that's the thing that sticks with me. Like, when I think of Night Angel, I feel like I can see the gross, disgusting streets. So the atmosphere was always strong for me, and so expanding that world building does seem like a good idea. So I don't know, like I said, I feel like for most people, if you haven't read the first 3, does that mean you should read the first 3 for getting this? Most people said you need that for context, which I would probably agree. I mean, you're picking up with characters who've gone through journeys in this first book, and if you're just starting here, like, what's that going to mean? Somebody did say that you could, but I don't know if the emotional beats would land. But then that said, I having read the Night Angel trilogy, really didn't get on with that writing, and we all know I'm not that picky about writing. I just thought the pacing was so poor, and it was so overwritten and long, and it felt like it was indulgent. I don't know. I didn't like Night Angel. I really like Lightbringer. I did not like Night Angel, so just know that. Next up, Lives of Puppets, TJ Klune. Wow, were there a lot of thoughts and reviews, a lot of mixed opinions. I wasn't expecting this to be so divisive, but we have Judith, we have Bandy's Books, Millie's S Bookshelf, Books and Other Nerd Things, and Riley's Library that I looked at. So this is a Pinocchio-inspired story. So it's not a retelling of Pinocchio, and I think it's also like a flip on it, where primarily this world is full of androids, so puppet-like adjacent things, and then our Pinocchio character is the human. And I think the emphasis of the story is the human kid and his robot caregiver friends decide to rehab a robot they find, who I think was probably a war machine based off the vagueness people are talking about, but not tell his dad. And I don't really know why, but that's like the emphasis. And the first half of this story is, I think, tonally upbeat-ish, humorous, lighter, and then the second half is very different, and most people didn't like that. Or a lot of people felt the first half was a chore to get through, and that the second half was great. So that in general, this was a really unevenly paced book, and that humorous tone, that banter, that quippiness that is in this, to help with the heavy emotional parts, because this is in like a dystopian world and there are heavy things going on, that worked really great for some people, and for other people, it was like, I think it was Books and Other Nerd Things, did not like the dialogue, because I think there's a lot of potty humor and stuff like that. So if you didn't like, Tress in the Emerald Sea, or like Sanderson's humor when he's like Wayne in Mistborn Era 2, I feel like it's that type of humor based off what people are talking about in here, where it's just like, why is this juvenile humor? What are we doing with that? So we have that humor over a very like kind of depressing setting with a lot of emotion. And I think that disjointedness either worked for people to help it make it less sad, but also sometimes I think was jarring because it's like, I don't like this. And for most people who have read the other two works, like there's a lot more works than the other two, but like House in the Cerulean Sea and The Whispering Door, those two adult works, those have a whimsical middle grade adjacent nature. I mean, they're not for middle grade audiences, but remind adults what it's like to read a middle grade sort of experience. They liked this one the least, but I will point out Millie S. Book, who has not read other TJ Klune, loved this, and this inspired her to want to put the other ones higher up on her TBR. So I think part of it might be an expectations game, where if you're expecting this to be Under the Whispering Door or House in the Cerulean Sea, that's not what the project of this is. It's not going to hit you the same way, even if there maybe are some overlapping elements. So yeah, I would just go into it maybe with more average expectations, and maybe you'll have a better time with it. I don't know if I'll pick it up. I liked House in the Cerulean Sea, but not as nearly as much as everyone else. And for some reason, it's reminding me of Prayer of the Crownshine, and I know they're completely different works, but it's just like, I don't know if I want to deal with a robot society right now. I'm just not a robot person, and so I think that might be a weird thing that shouldn't affect me, because it's not like that important that a lot of the main characters are robots, but it's something that is making me distant. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention is that there is asexual representation in the book that people thought was done pretty well, so that is another thing. Up next is The Bone Shard War, which I have read, and I have a review for the whole series. Do I think it stuck the landing? I couldn't find a review among my circles and in like putting things into YouTube search, because like what I do is I look through my circles of people, I go on the Goodreads and I see if there are people I know who maybe put it in a wrap-up and it wasn't like a standalone review, and then I do a standalone review search on YouTube. And that's like approximately how I get this. And this is the third book in a series, so I really wasn't expecting that much. The fact that I got so many is quite astounding. I think the person who likes this the best is probably Elliot from Elliot Books, then maybe Murphy, and then Rachel, Jesse, and Laura all like it about the same, which is like 3.5 stars, and then I like it at like a 3-star level. I feel like for the most part, even if you adored the first book, that this last book was kind of a letdown in comparison. Even if you did end up ultimately liking where things landed at the end, because like if you're talking about just like the outline, course of events, this is where the characters end up, that's not too bad. It's just a really clunky execution, in my opinion, especially because I think the first two books are incredibly tight in their pacing and plotting. Even if I don't like some of the decisions and the relationships that we're exploring, they were tight, easy, fun reads. This one is huge and it's bloated and there's a lot of repetitiveness. Laura definitely brings up in her wrap-up, it's like, we keep going and everyone keeps going to do this thing and we're like, why were we doing this thing? And honestly, why? I still don't really know why. We could have done something more interesting or sped through that part, made it a montage, embrace the telling, not showing part of things. I don't think there were really important moments in most of those repetitive scenes. I still don't like one of the antagonistic forces that was introduced. I think it really took away from a lot of the coolness that could have been explored. So yeah, I'll leave you to look at all those reviews. I have my should you read, spoiler free. In general though, for most people, I don't know anyone where this is their favorite book in the series, which for me is always a red flag because I like my series to stick the landing. Like, truly, I do. And I don't know, I think it's stuck it, but if you're like doing a gymnastics, metaphor, we have a lot of hops at the end of this, okay? We are not just doing stuck one hop, like, there's a couple. I don't know if we stepped out of line, but it's not great. It's not what you want. And now we will get into Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee, which I have not read yet. I have an ARC. It's like behind me over here. Yeah, it's actually right here. Ooh, I have one. I haven't read it yet. And I'm maybe more interested, also concerned. There's a lot of reviews. Oh my gosh. Especially for a novella. Like, that tells you how popular Fonda Lee is in my circles. We have Matt's reviews, who gave it a 3, although it seems very clear from his review that he does not like novellas and the project of a novella, so, like, I do think if you do not like that novellas are short, that you won't like reading a novella. I think some novellas are better at being short than others, but if you just always want a 400 to 600 page book, that's obviously not what a novella is going to do for you. Nikki Hawks, Daniel Green, Grace, Bethany, Tammy, Rachel, and Mara, and I'm sure there's many others, but those are the ones that I read, looked up, and everything like that. And so this is a novella about a person getting to know their dangerous animal companion and training and coming together. There's maybe a revenge plot in the background, but I do think it is more about this forming of a bond, which has me very interested because I do like that. I really do. But, I mean, man, is it so mixed on if people think it's paced well, if people think this is enough space for it. There is no consensus. Sometimes there is a consensus, but the one thing I will bring up is some people who went into this wanting the uniqueness of the Greenbone Saga, which, like, I never thought of the Greenbone Saga as, like, this super unique fantasy. Like, it's different because it's set in an urban fantasy setting in, like, a 1980s adjacent world. But to me, it was using a lot of tropes that I'm very familiar with in fantasy. So even if it was, like, in a different skin, it didn't feel that different. But I guess this really didn't feel that different to people and was, like, people used words like traditional, basic fantasy and things like that. But everyone also always then said it was done well. It's just if you came to Fonda Lee for uniqueness, that might not be what you're finding here. So we have the trainer animal trope. It's a novella. It's more traditional. So I think it's just really going to depend. Do you like Fonda Lee's writing style? And that was a big thing. If you liked or didn't like her writing style, really affected if you reading the book or not, which I think is interesting because in my head, Fonda Lee's writing style, I don't know if I could read one of like a passage and be like, this is Fonda Lee. Like, there's some authors who I can just read something and I'm like, yes, this is this author. One of the things I liked about the Greenbone Saga is it was kind of one of those not in the foreground writing styles, but it kept things moving at a good clip. It matched the tone of the story. So I think that'll be a big determining factor for you. In terms of negative reviews, we have Bethany. Daniel was more disappointed. Matt was middle of the road. But in terms of I loved it reviews, Nikki, Grace, Tammy, and then Mara and Rachel are more middle of the road, 3.5, 4-star. And the last book we're going to talk about is an Olivie, I don't know if I'm going to say the author's name right, Olivie Blake, the person who wrote Atlas 6. We have One for My Enemies, which is another book that was self-pubbed, that got picked up by Tor to be traditionally pubbed, and this is a Romeo and Juliet inspired modern-day fantasy light on the fantasy, like the Greenbone Saga is what some reviewers were saying. All right, I have 3 reviews down below. We have Bethany, Emily Clement, and Matt Shami. I'm sorry I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. My handwriting is really bad. I blame it completely on me, but this is where I'm at. And that was a 5-star from Matt Shami, 4-star from Bethany, and 3-star from Emily Clement. And yes, a fantasy standalone, urban fantasy, light on the fantasy. It's kind of got, like I said, so it's Shakespeare inspired, so it has the melodrama of Shakespeare. Like, someone straight up said, there's kind of some insta-love qualities, and I'm like, well, you told me it's a Romeo and Juliet inspired thing. If it didn't have insta-love, I think that's the hallmark of Romeo and Juliet, is how are these people in love so quickly? So it has that. It has the feuding families who are oddly gender divided. Like, I think one family is all women and one family is all men, if I was understanding the reviews correctly. And there is some Russian magical folklore elements, but I don't think they play a really big role other than, like, aesthetically speaking. And it's melodramatic. It's got some twists and turns. Like, I think plot-wise, someone was saying, like, every 80 to 100 pages, something big happens. So it's got that type of projection into, like, a big climax. So Bethany, who already likes the Atlas 6, had a fun time. So I think the writing style really worked for her. Emily Clement, who really liked the writing style, really liked how emotions and character interactions on page are put out. Really didn't like the execution of understanding the motivations of people, and I think the melodrama of it all. And then Shami really enjoyed it. Had such a fun time, one of her favorite books of the year. So you have that to look into. I don't know if I'm ever in the mood for a Shakespeare retelling. I don't think that's ever a buzzword for me. If anything, it's always, like, I like Shakespeare. I just want to go watch the play. I don't necessarily need that melodrama in my books. I want to go see the play and experience it that way. So I'm more likely to like that if I'm not told beforehand, and then I'm just enjoying the story as it is. I'm like, oh, that's a really good nod to, X or whatever. But that is this April recent release roundup. Let me know if there were other books that you're like, Angela, why didn't you talk about this? And maybe I need to go look into it and put it on my radar. Let me know any of your thoughts about these books, spoiler-free, down below, if you have anything you want to add. And if you want to leave an emoji just to let me know you're here. Let's see. I don't know. Let's do a bird or something that reminds you of, like, a bird of prey. I think there's bird of prey emojis. Let's do that for Untethered Sky. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.